Season 2 of HBO's The Last of Us is overall enjoyable, but still something of a mixed bag. On the one hand, it recreates moments from the game effectively, delivering a huge gut punch both in Episode 2 and Episode 7 in particular. It also manages to deliver completely original moments excellently. On the other hand, small changes snowball quickly in ways that make otherwise well-done moments undermine one another, and certain character and story interpretations, whilst not automatically bad, will be unrecognisable from the game. The result is a season which holds up in its own right, but doesn't always do great in comparison to the source material. It was always going to be trickier to adapt The Last of Us Part 2 into a TV show than The Last of Us Part 1, for a number of reasons. Most obvious is that the source material of the first game is far more straightforward in the story that it tells, and we can see that in how many TV show scenes are lifted verbatim from the game. And even then, adaptational differences were inevitable. The second game tells a story that is twice as long, whose story delivery relies far more on both dramatic irony and the direct connection you have as a player to the actions of the character, leveraged to create discomfort when you must initiate those actions but have no choice over what they are. This is, by definition, a harder story to tell on TV than in the game. The second season also comes with a much greater weight of expectations than the first, not only because of its own success, but also because its success, and to a degree the success of other recent video game adaptations, has taught us that we can and should expect these projects to respect the source material. But also because of how intense and fraught the discourse around that source material already is. Game fans watching the show have not only had 5 years to sit with the content of Part 2, but their attachment has been forged in a climate where they've had to defend that content from a small but vocal, often vicious band of detractors. Not those who simply disliked it and chose to move on, but those who made hating the game a core part of their personality, meaning that liking The Last of Us Part 2 in public was an invitation to trolling and hate, which is to say nothing of the death threats, bullying, slander and conspiracy theories which have been levelled at the actors and creators of the game. No piece of media exists in a critical vacuum, and so this inevitably feeds into the pressures and perils the adaptation must navigate. Fans want the thing they fell in love with preserved, casting a critical eye over any misunderstanding or disregard of the text, real or perceived, intentional or otherwise, while detractors either want the show to fail to prove that the story was always bad, or to make the changes vindicate their criticisms of the original story. Sometimes both. The best way to navigate all of that, and Craig Mazin and Neil Druckmann's declared intent, is to shut out specific criticisms or praise, and instead hold each other accountable to focus on what is best for the show. And doing that, in the context of adapting Part 2, means reflecting what we saw in the game, but also making changes to suit both the different medium and staying true to what has been established in Season 1, which itself included changes from the video game source material. This is how seemingly small changes in adaptation can snowball to become much larger changes, and it's something we see over the course of the season's 7 episodes for both good and ill. Different people will have different reactions to changes in general. To one extreme, there are those who view all change as unnecessary. The source material is there, why not just copy it? That doesn't work specifically because different mediums have different strengths and limitations. Episodic TV shows work differently, even than movies, let alone than books or comics or video games. On the other extreme, there are those who view change as mandatory. Otherwise, why not just return to the source material? But the whole point of an adaptation is to tell the same story for a new audience, one that might otherwise never experience it at all. For me, somewhere between those two poles is the right balance. Change not for its own sake, but to effectively hit the same story beats in a different medium. Did this season strike that balance? Well, yes and no. The big contradiction in these 7 episodes is that what seem like monumental changes from the game have managed, broadly, to hit the right notes and bring us to the right place in the narrative. While more apparently minute changes have produced a much bigger shift in the context of the events that we're witnessing. And so we have line-for-line recreations of game scenes, which manage to alter characterization, alongside modified or entirely new scenes which stay true to the source material. And in both cases, there are examples where it works well, and examples where it doesn't. But the biggest change is the one that didn't happen. The Last of Us Part 2 is structured so that we experience the same 3 days in Seattle twice. First as Ellie, then as Abby. In part, this is because of the fact that in a game, it's a lot harder to change perspectives with any frequency. As a player, you get a deeper connection with the character you control than you might with one you watch on TV. And the game chooses to go all in on that, fully investing us in Ellie's hate and desire for justice, and showing us the darkest, lowest ebb that takes her to, before switching to Abby's perspective and connecting us to the person we'd spent so long hating. It was an incredibly brave narrative decision, and also one that video games can pull off in a way that no other medium can. This is why I was convinced, even up to the midpoint of the season, that the show would change its structure and show us Ellie and Abby's stories in parallel. The early reveal of Abby's identity as a Firefly, and then of her nightmares, and that the surgeon that Joel shot was her dad, seemed to confirm this. Because we don't get either of these reveals in the game until we're in control of Abby, halfway through the game. In one way, the TV show sticking to the game structure is even more brave, knowing how divisive that decision was for the game. And yet in another, these early reveals seem to almost undercut that choice. Not immediately, but certainly in retrospect. The initial scene with Abby and her friends as they bury the Fireflies isn't bad. The opposite, in fact. It's well acted and builds a sense of threat and foreboding. And when Abby finally gets her hands on Joel, there's a payoff in the sense that she recounts the description of Joel that she got from the nurses, and which we get the sense has dominated her thoughts for 5 years as she waited for this moment. There's also a great character moment in the monologue that Abby delivers, when she talks about how there are some things that everyone agrees are wrong, like killing unarmed people. It shows how singular her focus is, how unwavering her belief that she is absolutely in the right, and, crucially, that she is lying to herself. We know this from her complete omission of any reason why Joel might have done any of this, the fact that Ellie was in the operating room, and this is only further reinforced when we meet the leader who taught her this code, and the group she's part of, and their actions in those scenes are exactly what she claims only people like Joel would do. But in service of this point, Abby talks far too much, revealing information that we as the audience do not yet need to know. Not only because they are still following the structure of the game, and they've already played an important hand when it comes to humanizing Abby in the second half of the story, but also because any air of mystery around Abby's motives is now gone. We have no need to wonder. We already know. Not only that, but the same knowledge about Abby's dad is also freely offered up by Nora when Ellie confronts her in episode 5. And this is where I mentioned the beat-for-beat recreations of the game come with the most significant changes. That scene is played perfectly. Bella's Ellie giving off an air of menace that signals her descent into darkness and obsession. But those extra lines about Abby's dad feel out of place for a couple of reasons. From a game player's perspective, we know that Ellie learns about Abby being a Firefly, but she never knows about her dad. Her line when pleading for Tommy's life, and the cut to a flashback where we take control of Abby to reveal who her father was, make this perfectly clear. Even as the game ends, Ellie never fully knows Abby's motives. Ellie knowing the surgeon was Abby's dad recontextualizes her actions from that point onwards, and it remains to be seen how that affects the way the story plays out in full. The information delivered also feels like it takes the sting out of Nora's moral plea. The game version is a straightforward plea to think of the dead, killed by Joel. The show version emphasizes that the doctor was going to make a cure from Ellie, which for the audience is a reminder of why Joel did what he did, to save the life of a child, undercutting the moral ambiguity of this moment. It doesn't entirely undo it, because Ellie's actions remain terrifyingly visceral with clear visual parallels to how Abby killed Joel. But in this moment, we should be questioning why Ellie is doing this. Something Dina's dialogue earlier in the episode reinforces, when she says that nobody deserves the torture Joel suffered, and that Nora will suffer. We shouldn't be distracted by questioning Nora's condemnation of Joel's violence. In episode 6, the show opts to contain all of the flashback materials in a single episode, and the patrol that Joel takes Ellie on is a complete change from the patrol we see in the Finding Strings chapter of the game. Instead of clearing out a motel and finding the corpses of 2 teenagers from Jackson, whose death makes Ellie again question Joel's lie about the Fireflies, the pair find Eugene, who's been bitten while on patrol, and when Joel lies to Eugene's wife Gail about the circumstances of his death, Ellie has his suspicion that Joel wasn't telling the truth about the Fireflies confirmed, and it breaks their relationship. This change is one that was done really well, and makes sense in that it hits the same emotional and thematic beats as the material it deviated from. It also sits within one of the best written episodes of the series, where another huge change, the flashbacks being bundled together rather than scattered through the story, delivers a great through line about Joel's efforts to be a good father and better than his own dad, even as his relationship with Ellie deteriorates. But in this episode, there are a couple of smaller changes which, despite seeming innocuous, have a considerable impact on the broader context and characterization, and seem to speak to a misunderstanding or misinterpretation of Ellie's character throughout the season. That episodes 6 and 7 were the only 2 which were not exclusively written by Craig Mazin speaks to how much the season could have benefited from so much more of Neil Druckmann and Hallie Gross's input as writers of the game. Neil has a couple of times on the official HBO podcast made a bleak reference to not being around for the filming of certain scenes. And we know now that this time is mostly taken up by directing Naughty Dog's new IP, Intergalactic: The Heretic Prophet. This appears to have given Craig more free rein than we might have seen in Season 1. And it sadly appears that this is what has resulted in a lot of what I am critiquing here. Even in the final 2 episodes, he was still actively involved in the writing. And one thing we know came from him, since Hallie confirmed it in an interview, is the choice to make every flashback fall on a birthday for Ellie, where in the game only the appropriately titled The Birthday Gift takes place on a birthday. Whilst a seemingly inconsequential change, little more than a framing device, what this does is push back when certain events happen. So Ellie doesn't get to go outside the walls of Jackson on patrol at all until she turns 19. In the first game, the characters of Henry and Sam served as a warning for Joel, Henry's overprotectiveness towards Sam ultimately playing a role in getting him killed, where Joel's decision to trust Ellie and give her a gun helped keep them both alive. So when Joel is cautioning Ellie in the second game about going on paired patrols, or talking to Jessie about what route she should be assigned to, he's fussing because he worries, but still ultimately trusts her capabilities, and it's more about wanting to keep a connection to her. In the show, he seemingly hasn't learned the lesson about overprotectiveness, and actively wants to get her taken off patrols, after delaying longer before letting her go in the first place. From a narrative perspective, this change isn't necessarily a bad one, and it does help to give further weight to the narrative through line for episode 6, of Joel starting to instinctively make the same mistakes as his own father, but then reconsidering and trying to do better. But it does reduce the amount of experience Ellie has dealing with infected, and reinforce the appearance that in Ellie and Dina's dynamic, Dina is the more competent one and is effectively carrying Ellie at certain points. In the show and the game, Dina's actual role is to be a calming presence, so that when Ellie separates from her, she is at greater risk of her darkness coming out. Yet the perception of Dina being the smart one undercuts this, and has clearly created the perception among a lot of viewers that Dina feels more like the main character than Ellie. One example of this is Dina's monologue about how she found her mother dead and shot the killer. This is a great moment both in delivering backstory for Dina and for laying down a dividing line between justice and vengeance. Dina says that Joel didn't deserve what happened to him, no matter what he did. And as I mentioned earlier when talking about the scene between Ellie and Nora, This serves to underline that what Ellie does when pursuing Nora is just as wrong. It's that this comes on the heels of Dina doing all the work to plan a route to the hospital, and Ellie doing little and less in the meantime, that risks giving the wrong impression of the purpose of this scene. Another change which feeds into all of this is how Ellie's descent is characterized. In the game, we see Ellie overcome by a singular obsession which tightens its grip as she finds members of Abby's group dead, and then starts to kill them herself. While this is punctuated by moments of levity, they get fewer over time, and ultimately Ellie sees Dina, particularly the news that she's pregnant, as an impediment to her quest and goes off on her own, culminating first in the torture of Nora, and then abandoning Jesse, and then the murder of Owen and Mel. The show's decision to have the horde that pushes Abby and Joel together invade Jackson makes a lot of sense on its own. There's no way that the infected, as portrayed in the show, would be finished by a couple of Molotovs from Owen, as they were in the game. But this in turn necessitated a longer delay between Joel's death and Ellie leaving Seattle. This allowed the show to give us more time to grieve Joel, and delivered some great character moments, but it also meant that Dina had to get pregnant later on, and in turn that Ellie and Dina couldn't get together before Joel's death as they had in the game. That slow burn meant that, had the news of Dina's pregnancy earned the same reaction from Ellie as it did in the game, it would have put a schism between them right as they became a couple, perhaps even prevented it happening. Craig's way around this was to have Ellie's descent be more of a case of her wearing a mask around others, which slips more and more as she gets deeper into her pursuit of Abby. There are lots of moments where we see that mask fall for a brief second, before we see it off completely as Ellie faces Nora. Nor is this completely out of the blue, since it reflects a characterization of Ellie that the show first planted seeds of in Season 1, both in the scene where Joel beats the Fedra soldier to death, and then when she stabs an infected trapped in the floor of a pharmacy. We see Ellie's dead-eyed reaction to violence. Craig said in the podcast that she was activated by seeing Joel's violence. And in Season 2, Gail the therapist tells the audience that Ellie and Joel were always walking in lockstep, rather than Joel's violence shaping Ellie's violence. This provides a consistent character through line for the show that works and is excellently portrayed, but it is also one that will be conflicting for fans of the games, as it is a fundamental misunderstanding of Ellie's character. In the first game, her bravado was a facade for her own fears and lack of experience with this hostile world. She is continually shocked by Joel's violence, but adapts to it, ultimately using it to save herself from David and his people. In the second game, she on multiple occasions tries to enact violence in the same way as Joel does, and fails because his violence is impersonal and born of necessity, where she is driven by almost feral emotion. I don't want to say that TV show Ellie being different automatically makes that version bad, because it doesn't. Bella's delivery of that characterization is impeccable. Nor are all of the examples of changes in context and characterization bad, as I've tried to point out while talking about them. But those things which I do think are negatives, the use of exposition to tell when they need to show, or otherwise fantastic moments being undercut, do definitely stem from the snowball effect of these changes. Another character changed in the show from the game is Jesse. In the game, he says that he would have come with Ellie if asked, and until he and Ellie part ways on day 3, their relationship is amicable. In the show, he confirms in the finale that he voted against seeking out Abby and her crew, and has only come to bring Ellie and Dina home. He is more antagonistic towards Ellie over her actions, which he views as reckless, and only mellows out after that same conflict where they go on different paths as Ellie seeks out Abby. This works really well, both to show the impact of Ellie and Dina's leaving on those they left behind, and to add further weight to everything happening. They are, after all, caught up in a bloody civil war not of their own making, and at risk of death every moment. A risk that Jesse feels all the more with the knowledge that he will be a father. His sudden and unceremonious end all the more impactful because of how much more we now know of his motives and his hopes for the future. Having invested so much time into the game and knowing that world and lore as well as I do means I was always going to have an inherent bias towards the story of the game. It also makes it extremely difficult to evaluate this story as its own thing, in isolation from the source material. A review from someone with no prior knowledge of The Last of Us would do that a lot better. But I will reiterate the point that I always enjoyed the first viewing of each episode, when I was simply taking it all in and not thinking too hard about the comparison. So it's probably fair to say that a version of me with generally the same tastes and opinions but who had never played the game at all would probably think highly of the show. Not that I don't now. Again, my mixed opinions on changes and how they recontextualize the story doesn't mean I think the story is bad. But there would certainly be less baggage attached to that opinion. In every single episode of the show, the set design, makeup, choreography, visual effects, score, and performances have been on point. I have no notes about any of that. The directing, too, has always been effective in how the scenes are framed and the choices of what to focus on versus when to cut away. There's never been a point where I've been pushed out of the moment by any of these elements. And more often than not, they have made these moments more powerful. A great example of this is the porch scene at the end of episode 6. Again, it's a moment undercut by the impact of earlier changes to the source material, because Ellie only goes out on patrol for the first time at the age of 19, and because her rift with Joel was the result of seeing him lie about Eugene rather than finally learning the truth. She doesn't have to sit for 2 years with the full knowledge of what Joel did at the hospital before finally deciding she wants to try and forgive him on the porch. Instead, she only learns the full truth, including that he killed Marlene, the only person that had a connection to Ellie's mother, on that porch, and has had less than a minute to process this when she decides to attempt forgiveness. Her announcement also doesn't come after Joel declares that he would do it all over again. An incredibly powerful line in the game which stops Ellie in her tracks and serves as confirmation of his motive for saving her. Instead, she dismisses this line with an accusation of selfishness, which not only feels cheap and childish, but also forces Joel to again tell rather than show, with excessive exposition, that his motive was his love for her. And yet, coming back to the point, this moment still brings emotion out of you in spite of the missteps of the writing. Pedro and Bella's performances, the score, the decisions on when to move closer on their faces and when to linger with a line of dialogue, all of that still gives it a power similar to the original scene of the game. Equally, while we didn't need half of Abby's monologue or any revelations about her father, Joel's death still feels gut-wrenching, and Ellie's grief and rage in the immediate aftermath are incredibly powerful. The choice to have Ellie crawl to Joel's body to embrace him was heartbreaking. Ellie and Dina's chemistry is tangible, popping out of the screen in every scene where their relationship evolves, while Ellie's darkness, seen only in flashes previously, absolutely drives the confrontation with Nora. The tonal mismatch resulting from the necessities of the altered timeline doesn't change that these moments, in their own right, are great. It just means that the greater whole is lacking a cohesion between these otherwise well-executed scenes. The same is true when it comes to the action of the story. In the first 3 episodes, there was plenty of connective tissue between the big action set pieces that allowed us time to connect with the characters and to breathe. And the introduction of the Stalker in episode 1, a fantastic foreshadowing of a great moment of horror in episode 5, allowed the characters in the aftermath to discuss the implications of this new evolution, and the audience to see Ellie still hiding her immunity in a way suggestive of self-harm. That, in turn, connects to the discussion of her recklessness in confronting the infected, which points towards a death wish, or at least a disregard for her own life. All of which ties in with how her relationship with Joel has deteriorated, and her survivor's guilt over all those she has lost, and her desire for her life to mean something through sacrifice. Once we reach Seattle, however, there is a definite sense that some of the connective tissue is missing. In episode 4, it's not too bad, as we still get time to focus on character moments as Ellie and Dina's relationship deepens through the Take On Me scene, and then in the aftermath of several successive tense action scenes as Dina comes to terms with Ellie's immunity and reveals her pregnancy. But once the pair are a couple, Belatedly, because of the timeline changes, we get to see little of Ellie's character in terms of her desire for vengeance. There are moments, flashes of what lies beneath the mask, and as mentioned, Bella performs these perfectly. However, these moments are few, and overshadowed by the scenes of Ellie and Dina interacting as a new couple, before we face more action sequences. The factory full of stalkers is an incredibly well executed moment of horror, tension and action, as is the subsequent scene with the Seraphites in the forest. But in between, we only get a short beat between the characters, in the form of the interaction with a newly arrived Jessie. Although this does establish the impact of Ellie and Dina's leaving, and present a new obstacle to Ellie's quest, since Jessie and Tommy are there to bring the pair home, not to aid them, it's brief enough that we still haven't seen as much of Ellie's obsession as we have of her new romance, which, in the game, was already established, and so didn't take focus away from Ellie's main goal. This is why, even though each scene did what it needed to individually, and there was no need for any of them to be unnecessarily padded out, the episode still felt rushed and as though there was something missing. We didn't need to spend any more time with the Stalkers or the Seraphites. But after that moment where Ellie looks back and makes the choice to pursue Nora rather than ensure Dina is okay, we very quickly jump to her finding Nora, already overtaken by the darkness inside. That might have worked as is if Ellie's obsession had been the focus all the way through Seattle. If, for example, we had seen Ellie reject Dina's pregnancy as an obstacle to the only thing she really cares about, the way she does in the game. But because of the changes, and the changes required by those changes, we've had to focus on Ellie earning a new happiness at the cost of her seeing her lose herself due to her grief. That misdirection of focus feeds not only into the feeling of episode 5 rushing towards its climax, but also the perception of Ellie being less competent, which I mentioned earlier. Because again, Dina isn't doing anything that she doesn't do in the game. But while she does, the show is still emphasizing Ellie's reaction to her new romance more than her obsessive pursuit of vengeance, which alters the context of those actions. The one episode where these competing sides of Ellie work well together is the final episode of the season, and the way the juxtaposition between her romance and her obsession is used suggests how much better the same beats could have been earlier in the season with just a little more room to breathe. Ellie in this episode tells Dina everything, and we see her love for Dina and her own internal conflict about her actions cohere in a fantastic performance. And when Ellie parts acrimoniously with Jessie, refusing to go rescue Tommy because she thinks Abby is in reach, it feels organic and true to the source material. There is a through line between her feelings for Dina, her conscience wrestling with her own actions, and her still irresistible obsession with getting revenge. And here we get to see her push through to her destination, rather than simply arrive at it, as she did with Nora. There are obstacles to face, from being thrown overboard to nearly being lynched, which in the moment are nothing more than barriers to the things she knows she must do. And when she finds Owen and Mel, only for it to all go horribly wrong, we are called back to the internal conflict presented at the beginning of the episode. Just as this moment seemed to pull Ellie back to her senses in the game, so it does here as well, as she gets to experience an even more traumatic version of Mel's demise, and the fact that she has taken a truly innocent life in the process. As well as being the one episode where the different aspects of Ellie's characterization cohere the best, episode 7 is also the most faithful to the game, not only in the emotional and narrative beats that it hits, but also the order of events. There are changes, and one that I'm not sure how I feel about fully is Dina knowing exactly why Abby sought vengeance on Joel and her reaction to it. It feels like this, and all previous heavy-handed efforts to labour the point about Joel killing Abby's dad and the loss of the cure, are attempts at laying some foundation for the humanization of Abby in season 3. But if so, they don't do that for me. Not least because the previous episode ended on the specific beat of justifying Joel's actions as coming from parental love. At any rate, Abby's humanization in the game and sympathy for her side of the story comes not from decrying Joel's actions, but from the journey she goes on, which in many ways parallels Joel's journey. That aside though, episode 7 felt more cohesive and less rushed than episode 5, despite arguably going through the same amount of time at a similar pace. because we had that room to breathe. Because we saw Jesse and Ellie talk about their own motivations. Because their relationship went through the arc that it did in the episode. And because we didn't have different character moments for Ellie feel as though they were talking over one another. The season ending as the first half of the game did, with that intense cliffhanger and abrupt perspective switch, was also fantastic as a statement of intent for what is to come. This only solidified my feeling that Abby's motive should have been more shrouded in mystery up until now. Despite that, however, the very clear indication that we're going to be following her across the same 3 days, along with the breadcrumbs in the same episode that hinted at some of her journey, worked extremely well as a setup to build anticipation for what's to come. Having both a strong start and a strong finish elevates the season to better than I expected while in the middle of it. Those weaker moments are carried by just how visually stunning everything looked and the stellar performances of the entire cast, so that in the moment it's an enjoyable ride despite the missteps. And while it was almost an inevitability that fans of the game would be far more critical of the show than those going into it blind, it remains the case that the show was stronger when delivering brand new scenes that adhered to the themes of the source material than when it used faithful recreations of existing scenes in ways that were built on character interpretations that differed so sharply from the game. Though not necessarily bad or wrong in and of themselves, it remains to be seen how those alternate takes on the characters will affect the context of events still to come, in a similar snowballing of changes to the one that left Ellie's new romance and her quest for vengeance competing for screen time. What is clear is that, just as Season 2 clearly and immediately course corrected the biggest criticism of Season 1, the lack of action and infected, so Season 3 can improve with similar course corrections. For me, that means more of the writing needs to be collaborative. Neil and Hallie's contributions to episodes 6 and 7 are no doubt a significant part of why those episodes are overall stronger than earlier episodes. And just as vital, while things shouldn't be stretched out for their own sake, we do need moments to breathe so that different character moments aren't talking over one another. Which probably means more than 7 episodes, especially given how much narrative heavy lifting Season 3 needs to do with new characters and their backstories. With all of that said, I want to close out this review by saying that I'm being as critical as I am because of my love for the story. I want to see it adapted well and done justice, and there is definitely room for improvement before the full story has been told. I'm not one to just hate on a thing because it will get me clicks on YouTube, and I don't think this video has fallen into that trap. But equally, if I'm going to critique something, I want to be thorough and honest with my thoughts, and that's what I've tried to do here. Let me know your take in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, then give it a like and consider subscribing to keep up to date with all my content. Like the video that's just popped up, which YouTube thinks you should watch next. This is a Patreon and member supported channel, so if you want to become a member and unlock custom badges and emojis, early access to my videos, and your name in the credits, then click the join button below. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.